before the skyscrapers, before the private jets, before the world learned to say the name Jude Vicious like a prayer and a warning at the same time, there was just a cold room and a dream that everyone called foolishness. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had given up trying. The wallpaper peeled at the corners like skin after a sunburn. The single window faced a brick wall. The radiator worked only when it felt like it, which in November was almost never, and the light bulb above the desk flickered in a rhythm that had no pattern, as if even the electricity was uncertain about staying. Jude sat at the desk he had built from 2 wooden crates and a piece of plywood. His laptop was held together at the hinge with duct tape and willpower. His eyes were red from 16 hours of staring at code that kept breaking in the same place, and the coffee beside him had gone cold 3 hours ago because he kept forgetting to drink it. He was 24 years old. He had $11 in his bank account. His own father had told him at Christmas dinner 2 years before, in front of the whole family, that he would amount to nothing, that he was chasing a fantasy, that men like them didn't build empires. They drove forklifts and were grateful for the overtime. Jude had not gone home for Christmas since. The door opened. Mara came in from the cold wearing her waitress uniform, the black one with a small coffee stain on the left sleeve that wouldn't come out no matter what she tried. Her feet were swollen from the double shift. Her hair was pulled back in the practical way of someone who had stopped caring what she looked like at work because looking pretty cost energy she needed for other things. She was carrying a brown paper bag from the bakery 2 streets over that sold yesterday's bread at half price after 8 in the evening. She looked at him the way she always looked at him when she came home to find him still at the desk. Not with frustration. Not with the tired resentment of a woman who was doing too much and receiving too little. With something softer and more complicated than either of those things. With belief. Hey! She set the bag on the corner of the desk and put her hand on his shoulder. You've been at that screen since this morning, Jude. Eat something. I'm close. He didn't look up. His fingers kept moving across the keys. The algorithm is almost holding. If I can just fix this one gap in the server architecture, it will work. I know it will work. He stopped typing. His hands went flat on the desk. The rent is due tomorrow. Check the account. We're short by $40. Mara reached into the pocket of her uniform. She pulled out a fold of crumpled bills, the small ones, the ones that come from tips left by people in a hurry who round down instead of up. She set them on the desk beside the cold coffee. I talked to the landlord, she said. I told him I would clean the hallways every morning for a month. He said yes. She opened the paper bag. 2 bread rolls and a small container of soup. We have food. We have the internet. We have the code. That's enough for tonight. Jude turned around then. He looked at her properly for the first time since she had walked in, and she saw it happen, the thing she had seen 100 times before, the way his face changed when he remembered she was real and present and choosing him every single day. His eyes filled. Why do you stay? He asked. It was not the first time he had asked this question. It was the question he came back to whenever the weight of everything got too heavy to carry with pride. Why do you keep believing in this? In me? Your mother thinks you threw your life away. My father thinks I'm a joke. Half our friends stopped calling. Why are you still here? Mara sat down on the floor beside his chair because they had sold the only other seat in the apartment 3 weeks ago to pay for the faster internet connection the code required. She pulled him down beside her. She tore one of the bread rolls in half and gave him the larger piece. Because I watched you look at the stars when we were 16, she said simply. You never looked at them and saw what was there. You always looked at them and saw what could be there. You see the world differently from everyone else, Jude. And I don't want to be anywhere else when you finally show everyone what you see. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie. He had been carrying it for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and somehow this floor, this bread, this flickering light was more right than any moment he could have planned. It was a ring made from a piece of copper wire. He had bent it into shape himself, working it carefully with pliers late one night after she fell asleep. It was not much to look at, but he had made it with his hands and his intention, and those 2 things were the only currency he had. He slid it onto her finger. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. "One day," he said, "I will put a real diamond on that finger. I will build you something so large and so permanent that no one will ever be able to make you feel small again. I promise you, Mara. You will never be cold. You will never scrub another hallway. You will have everything." Mara looked at the copper ring on her finger. Then she looked at him. And she said the thing that would echo through the next 10 years like a bell that kept ringing long after the hand that struck it had moved on to other things. "I don't need everything, Jude. I just need you." She closed her hand around his. "Promise me something. Promise me that no matter how big the world gets around you, you will not forget how to be small with me. Just us. Like this." Jude looked at her in the flickering light of the cold apartment, and he said without hesitation, without reservation, with every piece of himself that was still uncomplicated and true. "Always. You and me against everything. That never changes." Present day. The dining table was 20 feet long and made from a single piece of mahogany that had cost more than the entire apartment building where they had eaten bread on the floor and made promises. Mara sat at one end of it. The chair beneath her cost $4,000 and was perfectly uncomfortable in the specific way that expensive things sometimes are, designed to impress rather than to hold a person gently. The food in front of her had been prepared by a private chef and was arranged on the plate with a kind of precision that made it look too deliberate to touch. She was eating alone. She had been eating alone for most of the last 3 years. At the far end of the table, Jude sat with his phone in his hand and the expression he wore when his mind was somewhere else, which was most of the time now. His suit was the color of midnight and cost more than Mara used to make in 4 months of double shifts. His watch caught the chandelier light every time he moved his wrist. He was a different man from the one on the floor with the copper wire ring. Not different in the way that growth makes people different, fuller, deeper, more themselves. Different in the way that distance makes people different. He had traveled so far from the cold apartment and the flickering light that when Mara looked at him across the 20 feet of mahogany, she sometimes struggled to find the boy who had bent copper wire into a circle with his hands. The copper wire ring was gone. He had replaced it on their 5th anniversary with a 10-carat diamond that sat on her finger like a beautiful, heavy stranger. "Jude." Her voice was quiet. She had learned to make it quiet. Loud got her nowhere in this house. "It's our anniversary. Do you remember what day it is?" He looked up from the phone briefly. The look he gave her was not cruel. That was the hardest part. It would have been easier if it were cruel. Instead, it was the look of someone glancing at a piece of furniture they have stopped really seeing. Present but unregistered. "I have to fly to Singapore tonight," he said. "Elena confirmed the investors are ready. The deal closes tomorrow morning their time." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Go to Cartier tomorrow. Get something you like. My assistant will arrange the funds." "I don't want something from Cartier." She said it gently. Without accusation. Just truth. "I want you to sit here with me for 1 hour. Just 1 hour, Jude. Like we used to sit on the floor." He picked up his briefcase. He checked his watch. He was already at the door in his mind. "Mara." His voice had the patient flatness of a man explaining something to someone who keeps not understanding it. "I am running a company worth $10 billion. The Singapore deal alone will add $300 million to our portfolio. Everything you have, everything in this house, every piece of jewelry on your body exists because I work the way I work. That is how I love you. That is what love looks like at this level." He walked out. The oak doors closed behind him with the solid sound of something expensive and final. Mara sat at the 20-foot table in the $4,000 chair and looked at the food she had not been able to eat and the empty seat at the other end and the chandelier throwing light across the room with cheerful indifference. She pressed her hand flat against the tablecloth. Under the diamond. Her finger remembered the shape of the copper wire. The weight of a promise made on a cold floor by a young man who had meant every word of it. She sat there for a long time in the silence of her beautiful, empty life. Then she got up. She carried her plate to the kitchen herself because the staff had been dismissed for the evening and she had never been able to sit with mess, not even when she was exhausted. She washed the dish by hand the way she had washed dishes in the cold apartment. Carefully, thoroughly. She turned off the kitchen light. She walked upstairs through the house that had 14 rooms and one person in it tonight. She did not cry. She had learned that crying required an audience to matter, and she had not had one of those in a very long time. What she did not know, climbing the stairs of her perfect empty house on the night of her anniversary, was that her body had already begun keeping its own account of everything she had swallowed in silence. And the bill was almost due. The gala was held in their own home. This was Jude's idea. A fundraiser for the Vicious Foundation, his charitable arm, the one that generated excellent press and excellent tax benefits and whose name appeared on 3 buildings in the city. 300 guests. Catered by the best firm in the country. Flowers flown in from Amsterdam. A string quartet in the East Wing. Mara had spent 6 weeks organizing it. Not because anyone asked her to. Because it was her home and she still believed, in the part of herself that refused to stop trying, that if she did enough, contributed enough, showed up enough, at some point Jude would look across a room full of people and find her the way he used to find her across any room when they were young. Instantly. Inevitably. Like a compass finding north. She wore a dress the color of deep water. She had chosen it herself without a stylist, because she had her own taste and had always had her own taste. And the dress was beautiful in the quiet, confident way of something that doesn't need to announce itself. She was standing near the entrance when Jude arrived with Elena Marsh. Elena was Jude's best friend and had been for 7 years. She was everything the word polished was invented to describe. Sharp clothes, sharper mind, the kind of laugh that made people feel included even when they were being quietly assessed. She was not a bad person, Mara had decided a long time ago. She was simply someone who occupied the exact space in Jude's life that Mara was supposed to occupy, and did it so naturally that neither of them seemed to notice the displacement. Jude's hand was at Elena's elbow as they walked in. He was leaning toward her slightly, speaking close, the way he used to lean toward Mara in crowded rooms when he wanted to make sure she could hear him. He introduced Elena to the investors, the board members, the visiting dignitaries, as his right hand. His anchor, the person who kept the ship steady. He said it with the warm pride of someone describing a person they genuinely valued. Mara stood 3 feet away and heard every word. She smiled. She had become very good at smiling in this house. Jude's mother, Constance, appeared at her elbow an hour into the evening. Constance had never hidden the fact that she considered Mara an adequate choice rather than an inspired one. She expressed this in the particular language of wealthy women who have learned to wound without leaving marks. Tonight she looked at Mara with the assessing eyes of someone inspecting property. "You look tired, Mara," she said. Her voice was sweet. Her eyes were not. "You really should make more of an effort at these events. You're representing Julian's image, not just yourself." "Jude," Mara said quietly. "I beg your pardon. His name is Jude, not Julian." She kept her voice even. "And I organized this entire event. The flowers, the catering, the seating, the program, the foundation's presentation. I have been working on it for 6 weeks." He paused. "But thank you for the feedback, Constance." She walked away before Constance could respond. It was one of the small private victories she allowed herself when the larger ones were no longer available. Later that night, well past midnight when the guests had gone and the staff were clearing away the evidence of 300 people's celebration, Mara found Jude in his study. He was on the phone with Elena, laughing at something, the real laugh, the full one that started in his chest and came out easy and unguarded. She stood in the doorway for a moment. He did not look up. She turned and went to bed alone. She lay in the dark of the enormous bedroom and put her hand on the empty side of the mattress, and she thought about the cold apartment and the floor and the bread and the promise. She thought about how much of herself she had poured into the making of this man, this life, this empire. How she had worked 2 jobs so he could work on one dream. How she had sold her grandmother's gold bracelet, the only jewelry she owned, to pay for the server upgrade that made the algorithm finally work. How she had written the first investor introduction letter for him at 3 a.m. because he was brilliant at building things but struggled to explain them to people who needed to be impressed rather than just shown. She had been his translator to the world. His anchor. his right hand. And now those words belonged to someone else. She closed her eyes. She was tired in a way that sleep was not fixing anymore. A deep tired. A tired that lived in the bones. She did not know yet what the tired meant. She would find out in 11 days when she coughed into her handkerchief after breakfast, and looked down at what came up, and understood that her body had moved beyond metaphor. The tiredness was not grief. It was something with a name and a timeline and a brutally specific number of months. But that was 11 days away. Tonight she simply lay in the dark of the house that had her name on the deed, and did not have her presence in any room that mattered. And she breathed, and she waited for sleep that took a long time coming. She had tried the direct approach 6 months ago. She had sat across from Jude at breakfast, the one meal he occasionally still took at home, and she had said clearly and without drama, "I'm lonely, Jude. In this house, in this marriage. I need more from you than money. I need your time. I need you to be present with me." He had looked at her over his coffee with the expression he wore when a junior employee raised a concern he considered insufficiently researched. "Mara," he said, with the patient weight of someone who has explained this before and is tired of explaining it again. "You have a house that costs $40 million. Car that costs more than most people make in 10 years. A wardrobe. A foundation credit card with no limit. What exactly is it that you feel you are lacking?" "You," she said simply. He set down his coffee. He looked at his watch. "I express love through provision. That is not a character flaw, it is a love language. Some people need to hear words. Build things. This house, this life, everything you have is my love language. I would appreciate it if you could respect that instead of reframing it as neglect." She had heard this speech before. It was a good speech. It had logic and structure and the self-assurance of a man who had built a $10 billion company on the strength of his own convictions. It also had nothing to do with sitting on a cold floor sharing bread with someone because they were the only warm thing in the room. She stopped trying the direct approach. She tried the indirect one instead. She booked a restaurant for a Thursday evening. Their restaurant, the small Italian place on Clement Street where they used to go when they first had enough money to eat somewhere with tablecloths. She arranged everything quietly. She told his assistant to block the time as a personal appointment. She put on the blue dress he had once told her made her eyes look like the sea. She sat at the table for 45 minutes before his message came. Elena's pitch ran over. "These investors are critical. Use the card. Hurry." She sat for another 5 minutes. Then she folded the napkin the way she folded everything in her life now. Neatly. Carefully. As if the precision of the fold could compensate for what the evening had not been. She paid for the table. She drove herself home. She did not tell him she had waited. He did not ask where she had been. In the house, Jude's mother had taken to visiting 3 times a week. These visits had a consistent quality. Constance would arrive, walk through the rooms with the ownership of someone who considered her son's home an extension of her territory, offer observations about the decor, the staff, the dinner menu, and Mara's general adequacy, and leave before Jude returned so that none of her commentary was ever witnessed or challenged. Mara had documented 3 incidents. A guest towel thrown in the bin because Constance considered it the wrong shade. A staff member reduced to tears in the kitchen over a perceived slight. A comment made in front of the foundation volunteers about Mara's background, her waitress years, her ordinary family, delivered with the light pleasant tone of someone sharing an interesting historical fact. When Mara mentioned these incidents to Jude, he looked at her with the specific tiredness of a man being asked to referee a conflict he considered beneath the level of his current concerns. "My mother is difficult," he said. "She has always been difficult. You know this. Why do you let her get to you? Because she treats me like I don't belong in my own home. This is her son's home. She has a right to feel. It is my home too, Jude." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Elena gets along with my mother perfectly." The room went very quiet. Mara looked at her husband across the space of their beautiful kitchen and she understood, in the complete way you understand things you have been refusing to understand for a long time, that she had been weighed against Elena Marsh and found wanting so many times that the comparison had become his default setting. She was no longer the standard. She was the exception that kept failing to measure up to it. "I see," she said. She walked out of the kitchen. She walked upstairs. She went into the bathroom and she sat on the edge of the bathtub and she pressed her hands against her knees and breathed until the thing in her chest that wanted to collapse agreed to hold a little longer. She had been holding it together for so long. She was so tired. The bone tired was worse today. And the headache behind her eyes had not gone away in 4 days. And last week there had been the bruise on her arm that she could not account for, large and dark, appearing from nowhere. She told herself it was stress. The body does strange things under sustained stress. She had read this somewhere. She believed it for 3 more days. Then came the morning with the handkerchief. She was in the garden when it happened. It was early before the staff arrived, before the house woke up around her. Mara had always loved this hour. When she was young and working double shifts, she used to wake early and sit at the window of the cold apartment watching the city begin and feeling, in those quiet minutes before the day demanded things of her, that she belonged to herself completely. She still woke early. The garden was her window now. She was walking along the path between the rose beds when the cough started. It had been building for a week, the kind that sits in the chest and grows heavier each day. And she had been dismissing it with the focused patience of a woman who has learned to dismiss things that inconvenience her because stopping to examine them costs time she does not have. She coughed into the white handkerchief she was carrying because she was Mara, and she carried handkerchiefs and had always carried handkerchiefs, and this small ordinary habit was one of the last things in her daily life that was completely and uncomplicatedly hers. She looked down. The white linen was red. Not a little red. Not the pale pink of a minor irritation. Red in the way that means something has broken inside you, deep and structural, the way old pipes break under too much pressure for too long. She stood very still in the garden with a handkerchief in her hand, and the roses around her, and the early light coming over the wall, and she breathed with deliberate care because something in her body was telling her that careful breathing mattered now. She went inside. She changed her clothes. She got in her car. She drove herself to the hospital. She did not call Jude. He was in a breakfast meeting. She told herself she would call him once she knew what she was dealing with. That there was no point alarming him over something that was probably nothing. The probably nothing took 3 hours and 4 tests and a doctor with kind eyes and careful hands who asked her to sit down before she explained what the results showed. Acute myeloid leukemia. The doctor said the words the way doctors say difficult words, slowly, clearly, with the professional gentleness of someone who has had to deliver this kind of news before and has never entirely gotten used to it. She explained what the diagnosis meant. She explained the progression. She explained what treatment could do and what it could not do and what the realistic timeline looked like without treatment and with it. 5 months. Possibly less without intervention. Possibly 8 with aggressive treatment. Mara sat in the chair across from the doctor, and she listened to all of it with the attentive stillness she had developed over a decade of being a woman who absorbed difficult information alone. She asked 4 questions. They were practical questions. About treatment schedules, about side effects, about what to expect physically. She did not ask the question that was sitting in the center of her chest like a stone. She did not ask, "Who is going to come with me to these appointments?" She knew the answer. She drove home in the quiet of the afternoon. She sat in the car in the garage for a few minutes before going inside. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. The 10-carat diamond caught the light in the dim garage, throwing small pieces of brightness in every direction. She thought about calling Jude. She picked up her phone. She looked at his name in her contacts. Then she put the phone down. Not because she didn't want to tell him, but because she sat there and tried to imagine how the conversation would go, and she could not build a version of it in which he said the right thing, in which he became the person she needed him to be in the next 5 to 8 months. She thought about the garden that morning. About standing alone with a bloodied handkerchief and not having a single person to call who would come immediately, without question, without needing the situation explained before deciding whether it warranted their time. She had a husband. She had a mother-in-law. She had a house full of staff. She had no one. She went inside. She made herself tea. She sat at the kitchen table and she looked out at the garden where the roses were still blooming, indifferent and beautiful. And she made a decision that would shape the next 5 months of her life. She would not tell him yet. She would begin treatment. She would give him one more chance, Not a dramatic ultimatum, not a last-ditch plea, but simply the ordinary daily opportunity to look at his wife and see her. If he looked, she would tell him. If he looked, she would let him in. She would wait and see if he looked. She already knew, in the deepest part of herself, what the answer was going to be. But she had loved this man since she was 16 years old, looking at the stars with him, and she owed him at least the chance to surprise her. Chemotherapy began on a Wednesday. Mara told Jude she had a wellness appointment. He nodded without looking up from his laptop. She drove herself to the hospital. She sat in the treatment chair for 4 hours with a needle in her arm, and a nurse named Grace who brought her warm blankets and spoke to her gently and was, for those 4 hours every Wednesday, the kindest human presence in Mara's life. She drove herself home after. She made dinner. She sat across from Jude, who had arrived late from a meeting, and ate while responding to emails on his phone. She ate half of what was on her plate because the nausea had started, and swallowed carefully and kept her face arranged in the expression of a woman having a normal evening. She was good at this. She had years of practice. The weeks developed a rhythm. Wednesdays at the hospital. The rest of the week managing the exhaustion and the nausea and the way her body was slowly revising itself around the treatment. She lost weight. She noticed it first in her clothes, in the way fabric that used to fit now shifted and gathered in new places. She bought 2 sizes smaller and said nothing. Her hair began to thin in the 5th week. She found it in the shower drain, more than the usual amount, and she stood there with the water running over her, and she let herself feel it fully for exactly 60 seconds. The fear, the grief, the specific loneliness of standing in a shower in a house with another person who did not know she was dying. Then she turned off the water. She dried off. She went about her day. She had not told him yet. He had not looked. On a Tuesday evening she tried once more. She had been preparing for it all day, selecting her words with the care of someone who understood they had one more good attempt in them. She went to his study. He was on his laptop with the video call window open, Elena's face bright on the screen, both of them laughing about something that had happened at a conference. She stood in the doorway and she waited for him to notice her. He did not notice her. She knocked on the open door. He held up one finger. The universal signal for wait. She had been waiting for 3 years. She waited another 10 minutes. Then she said, "Jude, when you have a moment, I need to talk to you about something important." He covered the microphone of his laptop. He looked at her briefly. "Mara, I am in the middle of something. Whatever it is, can it wait?" "It has been waiting," she said quietly. He looked at her with that expression, patient and slightly burdened, and then he turned back to his screen and said to Elena, "Sorry, Elena, my wife. Give me 2 minutes." 2 minutes. He was offering her 2 minutes. She thought about the doctor's chair and the careful words and the number 5. She thought about the Wednesday treatment and Grace's warm blankets. She thought about the shower drain and the 60 seconds she allowed herself and the way she dried off after and carried on. "It's fine," she said. "It can wait." She walked out of the study. She went to the kitchen. She put on the kettle and stood at the counter and looked out at the dark garden, and she understood with the clean clarity of someone who has finally stopped hoping for a different answer that she was going to do this alone. She was going to fight for her life alone. In this house. While the man who had promised her everything including his presence sat in the next room laughing with someone else. She made her tea. She carried it upstairs. She sat at the desk in the small room she used for reading, the only room in the house that felt entirely hers, and she opened the notebook she had started keeping. She had been writing in it for 3 weeks. Not a diary exactly. More of a ledger. The word felt right. Accurate. A record of things that needed to be accounted for before she ran out of time to account for them. She wrote in it for an hour. Then she closed it and put it back in the locked drawer and took her medication and went to bed in the enormous room that had room for 2 people and held only 1. By month 3, Mara had stopped asking for anything. Not in defeat. Not in bitterness. In the specific peace that arrives when a person has exhausted every avenue and understood that further effort will not change the terrain. She had tried direct conversation and been handed a credit card. She had tried vulnerability and been told her love language was inconvenient. She had tried patience and presence and persistence. She was running out of time for any of those things now. So she stopped. She became, in those final months, the perfect wife that Jude had always implicitly been asking her to be. Quiet, undemanding, present but not pressing. She attended the foundation events when she had the strength. She smiled correctly at the correct people. She managed the house with the efficiency she had always managed it, right up until the days when getting out of bed required a private negotiation with her own body. She lost another 7 pounds. Her cheekbones stood out in her face now in a way that people who had known her before would have noticed immediately. In this house no one noticed. Constance noticed something but diagnosed it as stress and suggested a spa retreat with the brisk certainty of a woman whose solution to all female problems was expensive rest. Jude did not notice. Mara spent her good hours, the hours between treatment and exhaustion when her mind was clear and her hands were steady, writing in the ledger. She was telling the whole story. Their whole story. Not the version that existed in Jude's memory. The one where he was the architect of everything and she was the supportive backdrop. The real version. The one with the specifics. 2 jobs. The hallway cleaning. The grandmother's gold bracelet. The night she had called the investor, pretending to be from a venture firm she had researched for 3 days beforehand, and delivered a pitch so clean and confident that the man had asked for a second meeting. She had coached Jude through that second meeting for 2 weeks. She had written the deck. She had practiced his answers with him at 2 in the morning at the kitchen table. She wrote it all down. The dates, the amounts, the details. Not as accusation. As history. As the record of a partnership that one party had stopped acknowledging so long ago that the other party had almost stopped acknowledging it too. She was not almost anymore. She was writing it down so it existed outside of her body, so it could not disappear when she did. She was also writing something else. Letter. Not to Jude, not yet. A letter to herself. To the 22-year-old woman in the waitress uniform who had pulled crumpled bills from her pocket with the unthinking generosity of someone who did not yet know that generosity without reciprocity was not a virtue. It was a slow disappearance. You deserved better, she wrote. You always deserved better. And the part of you that knew that and stayed anyway was not weakness. It was love. Real love. The kind that stays even when it costs everything. That kind of love is not a mistake. It is a gift. The tragedy is not that you gave it. The tragedy is that it was received without recognition. She closed the notebook. She tried one last time. He came home at 9 on a Thursday looking pleased with himself, the way he looked after a deal closed well, and she was in the living room on the sofa with a blanket because the cold had gotten into her bones in a way she could no longer warm herself out of. She looked up when he entered. She looked at him carefully. She said, "Jude, look at me." Something in her voice made him pause. Not quite stop. Pause. He looked at her. She sat there and let him look. She did not hide the weight she had lost. She did not arrange her face into the fine expression. She let him see what she looked like now, after 3 months of chemotherapy and silence and counting down. For 3 seconds she thought he was going to see it. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Elena's car broke down. She's stranded. I have to go. He was already moving toward the door. I'll be back late. Don't wait up. The door closed. Mara sat on the sofa under her blanket in the quiet house, and she did not move for a very long time. Then she got up slowly, carefully, the way she did everything now that required a negotiation with her body, and she went upstairs. She took her medication. She lay down. She did not open the notebook that night. She had said everything that needed saying. Now she was just waiting for the body to catch up to what had already ended. Jude came home at 11:15 on a Friday night. The deal had closed. 30 seconds after the signatures went through. His net worth had increased by $400 million. He had celebrated with Elena and the investors at the best restaurant in the city, and he was carrying the particular energy of a man who has just confirmed to himself that he is exactly as good as he believes himself to be. He had not thought about Mara since the Thursday before. He noticed first that the porch light was off. Mara always left the porch light on. He had mentioned once years ago that he did not like arriving home to a dark door, and she had never forgotten. Small things like that were her domain. He registered the darkness with mild irritation, the way you register a minor administrative error. He unlocked the door. He stepped inside. Mara. Automatic. Unthinking. The greeting of habit rather than attention. Silence. The house was dark in a way that felt different from the ordinary dark of a house where someone has gone to bed. Heavier. More complete. He reached for the foyer light switch. The light came on. He saw her. She was at the foot of the stairs. Collapsed. Her body arranged in the boneless way of someone who had not chosen to be where they were. Her face was turned to the side against the white marble floor. Her skin was the color of old paper. And the marble around her was dark red. Jude did not move for 4 seconds. His brain was doing something he had never experienced before, refusing to process what his eyes were sending it, insisting on reclassification, insisting that what he was seeing had a different explanation than the one it had. Then his briefcase hit the floor. Mara. He crossed the foyer in 3 steps and dropped to his knees beside her. His hands found her face, her throat, her wrist. Mara, wake up. Mara. Her pulse was there. Thin and fast and wrong. Mara, look at me. Stay with me. Her eyes did not open. Help. His voice was something he did not recognize. Raw and cracked and enormous. Someone help me. Call an ambulance. The staff came from the back of the house. The housekeeper who lived on site. She saw the scene and she was already on the phone before Jude had finished shouting. He sat on the floor with Mara's head in his lap and he looked at the blood and he could not find the wound. He searched her for the injury, for the cut or the gash or the fall damage, because his mind was still insisting there was an external explanation. Fall. An accident. Something that could be explained and treated and resolved by morning. There was no wound on the outside. The ambulance took 9 minutes. They felt like 9 years. Jude rode with her and held her hand and said her name into her ear with the focused desperation of a man who has just understood that something he assumed was permanent is not, has perhaps never been, and that this understanding has arrived too late to be useful in the way that mattered. At the hospital, a doctor came to speak with him. Dr. Reeves was 40 years old and had the tired, honest face of someone who spent her days at the intersection of medicine and human failure. She looked at Jude for a moment before she spoke, with the evaluating look of a person deciding how to say something difficult to someone who is not going to receive it well. Your wife has acute myeloid leukemia, she said. Stage 4. She has been receiving treatment for approximately 3 months. The corridor tilted slightly. She has been. He stopped. Started again. She has been sick for 3 months. She came to us in October. She has been attending Wednesday appointments consistently. Dr. Reeves's voice was level, professional, but her eyes were doing something else. She came alone to every appointment. She listed no emergency contact. Jude stared at her. No emergency contact, he said. The words tasted like something rotten. Mr. Vicious. The doctor said his name with the flat precision of someone choosing not to soften what comes next. Your wife has been fighting a terminal diagnosis for 3 months. She has been doing it alone in your home, apparently without your knowledge. Her condition tonight is critical because the disease has progressed to a point where... She paused. I need to ask you directly. Did you not notice the weight loss? The fatigue. The change in her appearance. He thought about the Thursday. Look at me. Her voice. The thing in her voice that he had almost heard. He could not answer. Dr. Reeves looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the room where his wife was being stabilized by people whose job it was to pay attention. Jude stood in the corridor of the hospital in his suit that cost $4,000 and he felt something give way inside him. Not dramatically. Not loudly. The way a floor gives way after years of unnoticed rot. Quietly. Completely. With no possibility of pretending it had not happened. He sat down on a plastic hospital chair. He put his face in his hands. He thought about October, November, December. About the dinners. About the study door and Elena on the screen. About the Thursday and the porch light and the diamond and the cold apartment and the copper wire and a woman who had said I just need you and meant it and kept meaning it for 10 years while he built things that were not her. He sat in the plastic chair for a very long time. They let him into her room at 2 in the morning. She was sleeping. The machines attached to her breathed and beeped with steady indifference. She looked small in the hospital bed in a way she had not looked small to him in years because he had stopped seeing her, and when you stop seeing someone you stop registering the changes in them. She had changed enormously. He sat beside the bed and looked at his wife's face, and he memorized it the way he should have been memorizing it for years. The way her eyelashes lay against her cheek. The particular set of her mouth in sleep. The hollows beneath her cheekbones that had not been there in October. He had not seen her in October. He had been in the same house and he had not seen her. He stayed until morning. He did not sleep. A nurse brought him coffee at 4, and he drank it without tasting it and kept his eyes on Mara's face because he was afraid that if he looked away she would be less real when he looked back. At 7 he drove to the house. He did not know what he was looking for. He walked through the rooms with a specific confusion of someone seeing a familiar place for the first time, noticing details that had always been there but had never registered. The small room she used for reading. Her handwriting on the grocery list pinned to the kitchen board. The garden. The roses still maintained with the careful attention of someone who comes out early before anyone else is awake. He found the box under the bed in the reading room. Not because he was searching for it. Because the room was tidy in the particular way of someone who had been putting their affairs in order, everything in its place, everything arranged as if for a person coming after, and the box sat under the edge of the bed in a way that suggested it had been placed where it could be found. He sat on the floor and opened it. The notebook was on top. He opened it. He read it. He read it for 3 hours on the floor of the small room that had been entirely hers. He read about the double shifts and the hallway cleaning and the grandmother's gold bracelet. He read about the investor call and the pitch deck and the 2 in the morning practice sessions. He read dates and amounts and specific details he had not known and some he had partially known and chosen not to examine too closely. He read about the diagnosis. October 15th. He had been in Singapore that day. Elena had confirmed the investors were ready. He read about the Wednesday appointments and Grace the nurse and the warm blankets. He read about the Thursday evening and the study door and the phone ringing and Elena's car. He read about the letter to herself. The one to the 22-year-old woman with the tips money in her pocket. You deserved better. You always deserved better. He found the other document at the bottom of the box. The original one. Old paper, edges soft with age. The deed documentation for Vicious Technologies, his company, the company that was currently worth $10 billion. Attached to it was a bank statement. Dated 11 years ago. A transfer from an account in Mara's name. A sum that matched exactly the anonymous investment that had saved the company in its 3rd year. The one he had always attributed to a silent venture fund. The one that had arrived when he was 3 weeks from shutting down. He had never known the name of the silent investor. He knew now. She had sold her mother's inheritance. The only thing her mother had left her. She had turned it into an anonymous investment because she knew his pride would not have allowed him to accept it as a gift from his wife. She had protected his pride while giving him everything she had. He had built a $10 billion empire on a foundation she had laid with her own hands, her own money, her own inheritance, and he had repaid her by putting her name on a deed and her face in an empty house and her presence at the end of a 20-foot table where she ate alone. Jude Vicious sat on the floor of his wife's reading room with the documentation of his own failure spread around him, and he understood, for the first time and all at once and without any possibility of gradation, exactly what he had done. He put his face in his hands. And for the first time since he was a young man on a cold floor with copper wire and bread and everything still ahead of him, he wept. He did not leave the hospital after that. He brought the box. He sat beside her bed. He was there when she opened her eyes on the 2nd day and found him in the chair that had been empty for every Wednesday for 3 months. She looked at him for a long moment. Her face did not show surprise. It showed something more complicated. The recognition of a woman who had hoped for something for so long that when it arrived it no longer had the shape she had needed it to have. "You found the box," she said. Her voice was quiet and roughened. But it was hers. "Yes." She looked at the ceiling. "I wasn't trying to punish you with it. I know." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped in the posture of a man in the presence of something sacred that he has not earned the right to touch. "Mara, I need you to hear me. I know that what I say now is too late to be what it should have been. I know there is no version of apology that repairs what I failed to give you. But I need you to hear me say it. See it. All of it. Always. The bracelet. The investor. The Wednesdays. I see it." She was quiet. "I am going to fly every specialist in the world here," he said. "I am going to buy the best treatment available anywhere. I will not leave this building. I will be in this chair every morning when you wake up. Whatever you need, wherever you need to go, I will be there. I swear to you, Mara. I will spend the rest of my life." "Jude." Her voice stopped him. Gentle but absolute. The voice of someone who has passed through the place where promises land and come out the other side of it. He stopped. She turned her head to look at him. And the look in her eyes was not hatred. It was not bitterness. It was the look he least expected and most deserved. The look that cost her more than anger would have, because it required her to have enough left to feel it. Pity. And underneath it, the ghost of love. Still there. Worn to almost nothing by neglect, but still there. The way of fire is still fire even when it has burned down to its last small light. "I know you mean it," she said. "I know that right now in this room you mean every word." She breathed carefully. The breathing required care. "But meaning it now is not the same as having meant it then. And I needed it then. I needed you then. Not the company. Not the money. Not the Cartier account." He paused. "I needed you to sit on the floor with me sometimes. Like we used to." "I know," he said. His voice was wrecked. "I was dying long before the leukemia found me," she said quietly. "The cancer just gave it a name." He took her hand. She let him hold it. She was in the hospital for 11 more days. He was there for all of them. He slept in the chair. He learned her medication schedule. He spoke with Dr. Reeves every morning and asked intelligent questions and wrote down the answers. He called Grace the nurse by name and thanked her for the warm blankets she had provided every Wednesday when no one else had been providing anything. On the 8th day Mara was strong enough to sit up and they talked. Really talked for the first time in years. About the cold apartment. About the copper wire ring. About the stars and the dream and the algorithm and what they had been to each other when they were young and uncomplicated and real. She laughed once. Small and real, surprised out of her the way the best laughs always are. He held on to that sound. On the 11th day her condition shifted in the way that Dr. Reeves had warned him it might. Quietly. Without drama. The way Mara had done everything in the last 3 months. She opened her eyes one final time and looked at him clearly. "The copper wire ring," she said. "Did you keep it?" He had not kept it. He did not know what had happened to it. He had replaced it without considering what he was discarding. He could not speak. "It's all right," she said. She closed her hand around his. "I kept the memory of it. That was enough." The monitor flatlined at 6:47 in the morning. Jude Vicious sat beside the bed of the woman who had built his empire with her hands and loved him with everything she had and asked only for his presence in return. And he stayed there long after the nurses came, long after Dr. Reeves spoke to him quietly, long after the room grew bright with the indifferent morning light. He stayed. The way he should have stayed years ago. A year later, the company was worth $12 billion. Jude lived in a hotel. He had not been back to the house since the day he found the box. He could not go back. Every room held a version of Mara that he had failed to see when she was standing in it, and the rooms were louder now with her absence than they had ever been with her presence, because he was finally, permanently, paying attention. He had made changes. Not as punishment. As the only response available to a man who understood too late what had been in front of him. He dissolved the foundation and rebuilt it in Mara's name. The Mara Vicious Foundation for Women Navigating Illness Without Support. He funded it personally and substantially. He did not hold press events about it. He did not issue statements. He simply transferred the money and ensured it was used correctly and let Mara's name be attached to something that helped people the way no one had helped her. He resigned from the day-to-day running of the company. He appointed Elena as interim CEO. He did not explain his reasons to her in detail, and she did not press him. Because Elena was perceptive and had always been perceptive and understood somewhere underneath everything that the shape of the last 3 years had been wrong in ways she had benefited from without fully acknowledging. He sat in a lot of quiet rooms in that year. He was learning to be still. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the algorithm, harder than the Singapore deal, harder than any of the things he had confused with difficulty because they did not require him to look at himself. He read the ledger many times. He had it committed to memory now. Every date, every sacrifice, every amount. He carried it with him the way people carry the evidence of their own failures when they are determined not to repeat them. The last entry in the notebook was not addressed to him. It was addressed to whoever found themselves in a beautiful empty house at the end of a 20-foot table, eating alone. If you are reading this and it feels familiar, please hear me. The copper wire ring matters more than the diamond. The floor matters more than the table. Do not wait until you are dying to say you are lonely. Do not let someone love you from a distance and call it provision. Love is presence. Love is the floor and the bread and the flickering light and the person who shows up when you are the least impressive version of yourself and stays anyway. Do not mistake a castle for a home. They are not the same thing. No. I lived in one. Jude kept the last line of that entry in his wallet. He read it every morning before he did anything else. You provided the house, Jude. I provided the home. I hope you find your way back to the floor. He was still looking for it. He suspected he would be looking for a long time. But he was looking now. Properly. With both eyes open and no phone in his hand and no deal closing and no one in the room whose time he valued more than the truth in front of him. He was paying attention. It had cost him everything to learn how. If this story reached you, you are not alone. Your sacrifice is seen. Your love matters. Please like, share, and drop a comment below. It means everything to us. And if you are entering marriage, already in one, or healing from one, check the link below. It might be the most important thing you read this year. Take care of each other. We will see you in the next story.